1, 2. Good morning, Morai Rabotai. We are continuing on Masechet Chagigah, and we are on Daf Chaf Gimel Amud Bet. Today's Amud is being learned for Hatzlacha of Yeshua ben Dina Diana and Yael bat Rivka, and also for Aliyat Neshama of Sipora bat Yitzchak and Neshama of Anadia. Amen. Hereby 2 dots in the middle of the Amud. One of the other stringencies, Chumrot of Kodesh over Truma, is mentioned in the Mishnah. That when you have a kli with content of Truma inside of it, so let's imagine if I touch as a Rishon letum'ah, I would touch one of the pieces of Teruma. So what would the Teruma become? It will become Sheni. Now, if it's not touching anything else in the Kli, so then it is Tameh, and the other pieces could be Tahor. But if it's touching another Teruma, so the one that I touched becomes Sheni, the one that it is touching, it becomes Shlishi, and that's it. Because by Teruma, you can't go any further than Shlishi. That's the maximum level of Tum'ah that you could have by a Teruma. But the rest of the pieces in the Kli would all be completely Tahor. It's no problem with them. By Kodesh, there's a Chumrah that if I touch as a Tameh, if I, let's say, a Rishon letum'ah touches a piece of Kodesh inside the Kli, even if none of the pieces are touching, everything in the Kli becomes Tameh, because the Kli, the vessel itself, is Metzaref. It puts all of them together as though they're one, as though they're not just touching, but they're one. So if I touch one of them, even though that piece is not touching any of the other pieces in the Kli, everything becomes the Tameh, the level of the Tum'ah that was transmitted to that one piece that touched the Tum'ah. That's a Chumrah by Kodesh, which you don't have by Teruma. So that's one of the cases, elements of Chumrah that the Mishnah mentioned by Kodesh. Now, says the Gemara, how do you know such a Chumrah exists? Where do you see that you have a Chomer b'Kodesh mi b'Teruma that Keli is Metzaref Mashe b'Tochom? Menah Hanemili, says the Gemara, Amar Rab Chanin. Remember the names because we're going to be contrasting back and forth these names. Amar Rab Chanin. Rab Chanin said, the Amar Kra, it really is the Oraita. In other words, when you say, well, the Pasuk says it, so Rab Chanin is suggesting that this is actually in its core, not just a Chumrah, but really is a level of the Oraita, not a Chumrah de Rabbanan. The Amar Kra, Kaf Achat Asara Zahav Mele'ah Ketoret. We know by the Korbanot of the Nesi'im, this is mentioned 13 times in the Chumash, so it rings very, very much familiar to your ears, and also happens to be the parasha we have. So very much time appropriate. And it says, Kaf Achat Asara Zahav Mele'ah Ketoret. Why in the world would you have to say Kaf Achat? 1 spoon. So we know what the measurement of it is, right? And it says Mele'ah Ketoret. So just say kaf without the. So the achad is coming to tell you that the kaf, the spoon or the vessel that you are filling up with ketoret, makes it achad, makes all of the content of this kaf as one, even though that there are different particles there. And if you touch one particle, you have not touched the next necessarily, but it makes all of them to be one. And that's a pasuk. So Rab Chanin says, you know where you see this? Because Ketoret, you're talking about Kodshim over here, right? You're talking about Ketoret. And by there, it says Kaf Achat Asara Zahav Mele'ah Ketoret to indicate that Kaf makes everything that's in it, the content, Achat, one. So says the Gemara, HaKatuv Asa'o Lekol Masha Bekaf Achat. The pasuk is indicative that halachically speaking, from the perspective of Torah, everything that's in the kaf is achad, is one. So the obvious question to this would be, well, if I find anywhere else in the Mishnayot that would indicate that this is the Rabbanan, then I have a question on you, because you're saying that this concept is Doraita. And that's exactly what the Gemara does. The Gemara finds a Mishnah in the beginning of Perek Chet from the Mishnayot of Idiot, which the entire Mishnayot of Idiot is Eduyot, right? Is people testifying, testimonies of different halachot that were done, different dinim that we learn. And there in Perek Chet, Mishnah Aleph, the Mishnah says, an edut in the name of Rabbi Akiva. None other than Rabbi Akiva. So says the Gemara, Mativ Rav Kana. Rav Kana asked a question. Normally speaking, when we speak about Rav Kana is a Talmud of Rav. There are really 6 Rav Kanas, but here the normal Rav Kana is one of the top students of Rav. There's an entire story with him of having had killed somebody and he had to run away from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. Rav warns him how to deal with Rabbi Yochanan as being the residing Rosh Yeshiva of Eretz Yisrael. He ends up not listening to that, and he ends up actually dying young because of deviation that he made from his Rebbe Rav. But that's a fascinating story for a different time. It really is in Masechet Baba Kama Daf Kuf Yud Zayin. But Rav Kana says, Hosif Rabbi Akiva. This is the Mishnah in Masechet Idiot again. Hosif Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva added, what did he add it to? He added to Rabbi Shimon ben Betera. We're going to see the beginning of that Mishnah in just a moment. Rabbi Shimon ben Betera said a halacha, and Rabbi Akiva is adding to what Rabbi Shimon ben Betera said. So says the Gemara, Hosif Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva added to that case, Hasolet va'aktoret va'levona. The solet is the pure sifted flour that would be used for korbanot, and then levona and ktoret, which is the different species. The levona, you had it for the shrei baziche levona that was used on the shulchan, and it was also one of the 11 samimanei ktoret. So that's levona and ktoret that are also burnt in their own right, each one of them in their respective avodah of Beit HaMikdash. So Rabbi Akiva added that as well, and the gechalim which would be taken from Mizbeach HaChitzon for burning ketoret. In other words, where did you have fuel in order to do the ketoret that you did? They would take from the gechalim, from the coals, the hot coals, from on top of the Mizbeach. Which Mizbeach? The large one, Mizbeach HaChitzon. Right? There are 2 Mizbeachot. One is in Kodesh, inside the Kodesh, right, before you get to Shulchan and to Menorah. And the other one, the large one, was Mizbeach HaChitzon. They're also known as Mizbeach HaNechoshet. The big one outside was considered Mizbeach HaNechoshet because it was plated, it was outside of it, was made out of Nechoshet, out of copper. And the inside one was called Mizbeach HaZahav, because it was gold plated. Okay, so that's ketoret, that the gechalim rather, that you would take from Mizbeach HaNechoshet, from Mizbeach HaChitzon, for the purpose of ketoret. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva added solet, ketoret, levora, and gechalim, those 4 items. Sheim naga tevulyom b'miktzato, that if a tevulyom, if a person that's tameh would touch a little bit of them, would touch a corner, one end of them, pasal et kulo. The whole thing becomes tameh. The whole thing becomes pasul. So says the Gemara, in this case, that would be the Rabbanan. How do I know? V'had Rabbananhi. This din of Rabbi Akiva is the Rabbanan. Is not the Oraita. You want to suggest that the Kli, anything that it contains becomes like one, and that's a Deoraita biblical concept. I show you and I prove to you that you have a Kli and you touch something and it becomes tameh only midrabanan, not midoraita. And that's the din, the halakha that Rabbi Akiva teaches us in the beginning of the 8th parak of Mishnah in Yod. If you were correct, Rab Chanin, that this is a din deoraita, what do you mean Hosif Rabbi Akiva? That Rabbi Akiva added to this. It should be a din deoraita. It should be midoraita. Biblically speaking, it should become tameh. You shouldn't need a din derabanan of Rabbi Akiva adding to this, right? Says the Gemara, how do I know that this is the Rabbanan? By the way, how do I know that this is the Rabbanan? Midekatani Resha. You remember we said Rabbi Akiva is the end of the Mishnah, is adding on Rabbi Shimon ben Betera's halakha. So the beginning of the Mishnah says like this: He'id Rabbi Shimon ben Betera. Rabbi Shimon ben Betera said, Al efer chatat. If you have efer para aduma, shenaga tameh b'miksato, that a tameh person would touch one end of it. You have efer para aduma in a vessel. You touch as a person that's tameh one end of it. Rabbi Shimon ben Betera says the whole thing shetimeh et kulo. The whole thing becomes tameh. And says the Gemara, even that din of Rabbi Shimon ben Betera is the Rabbanan. Why? Because Rab Chanin, who said this from Kaf Achat, Asara Zahav Mela'ah Ketoret of our parasha, it's only talking about a very specific thing by Ketoret. So therefore, the din of Rab Shimon ben Betera in Masechet Eduyot of me as a tameh touching a little bit of efer para aduma, that's a din Rabbanan. You with me? The Torah only talks about Ketoret. So therefore, when Rabbi Shimon ben Betera talks about efer para aduma, that if I touch one end of it, the other end becomes tameh, that's an addition that's midrabanan. So when Rabbi Akiva adds to that, Hosif Rabbi Akiva, when I add on this, if this is the Rabbanan, when I add to it, that also is the Rabbanan. So it says the Gemara, the entire Mishnah in Perek Chet Mishnah Aleph of Masechet Eduyot is a din Rabbanan. Now we got a problem. Because you just said, in the name of Rav Chanin, that this din is a din deoraita of Kaf Achat Asara Zahav Mela'ah Ketoret, and that's the din of our Mishnah. It can't be the din of our Mishnah, because our Mishnah seems more like the case of Chomer Bakodesh Mibat Teruma, that any Kodesh has a Chumrah over Teruma. It sounds like our thing is from the Mishnah in Masechet Eduyot, which would be a din Rabbanan. So you don't have really so we have a problem now, because Rav Chanin said there is a concept midoraita, and we are saying in the Mishnah in Masechet Eduyot from Rabbi Akiva that this concept seems to be the Rabbanan. So which one is it? Is it the Rabbanan or is it the Oraita? Says the Gemara like this: it's both. You have the source, the core concept midoraita, but then Rabbi Akiva added certain cases that midoraita would be tahor, and Chachamim made it tameh. Now, what the Gemara is going to do is attempt one time. The Gemara is going to fall off of that, and we'll have a final answer. How you have a concept midoraita. That's going to be the maskana of the Gemara. That you have a concept midoraita, and there would be a scenario in which the oraita, the biblical concept, would not apply, and hence Chachamim added that as well. And our Mishnah still could be the oraita. That's going to be the approach of the Gemara in the next 5 lines. So says the Gemara, V'katani hosif Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva seems to be the Rabbanan. So now we have got a problem. Resh Lakish answers, Amar Resh Lakish Mishum Bar Kapara. Resh Lakish answered in the name of Bar Kapara, Lo nitzrecha ela le'shiarei mincha. It only it's needed over here for shiarei mincha, which is the oraita. Now, what do you mean? That means the Mishnah said solid, right? How did the mincha, korban mincha is a flour offering. The way it worked was you had a lot of flour Then you had, depending on which korban it was, you had some livona, you had some shemen, and you would do kmitza. Kmitza is one of the most difficult trainings for a kohen to do, as one of the avodot, one of the functions of the Beit HaMikdash. They had to grab with their fist an amount of flour, and then they had to basically clear it off with the two fingers over here, with their pinky, and also with their thumb, and then the amount that stayed within their palm and the three fingers, that would be the kmitza. It's one of the difficult avodot to do. When you read actually and learn about the details of how it was done, we're making it overly simplified, but that's kmitza, right? That's kmitza. So it says, so what would happen? This would be used, and the rest of it would be now eaten, would be available, and you no longer need the kli afterwards, right? Right now, when you have this kli, after I've done my kibitza, you don't need necessarily the kli anymore. It's there, but I'm done with my avodah. Now, if I touch right now this thing, does it become tameh or not? So that's what the Bar Kapara said. In other words, Resh Lakish is saying in the name of Bar Kapara, lo nislecha ela leshiarei hamincha. We call this bowl of flour right now shiarei hamincha. Shirai means the leftovers of korban mincha. That means I had the whole thing. I did my kmitza. Now, at the moment that I did my kmitza, the rest of what's inside this kli is called what? Shiarei hamincha, the leftovers of korban mincha, because I'm done with my korban mincha. I did what I had to do. So says Bar Kapara, Shiarei hamincha, do they any longer need the kli? No, they don't need the kli anymore. So because they don't need the kli, mideoraita, that concept of me touching this and the other end becoming tameh should not apply. Because remember, by kaf achat asara zahav melea ketoret, the calf you need, the entire calf, you're bringing ketoret. So that's the concept, that's the oraita. If it needs the kli that's put inside, then if you touch one end, the other end becomes tameh mide oraita. But if it no longer needs the kli, it's as if the kli, actually it's a very interesting hulat, a very interesting leniency when it comes to Tevilat Kelim from Rav Moshe Feinstein. He's discussing a person that's Baal Tshuva, goes home, the parents or the host does not keep the mitzvah of Tevilat Kelim, especially because we know Maran Shulchan Aruch in two places paskins that Tevilat Kelim is midoraita. It's machloket rishonim, whether it's the oraita or the rabbanan, massive machloket rishonim, and Maran holds is the oraita. You see it in Siman Kuf Chaf, in Sif Tet, Sif Yud Bet, and it becomes a problem now. Okay, and Rav Moshe Feinstein says, well, if you don't need the kli, then it could be lenient. In other words, if you're eating a piece of schnitzel, so it doesn't need, technically speaking, we're very nice people, we're sophisticated, so we don't eat with our hands on a table. But really, let's be serious. Do you need the plate there for a schnitzel? No, you don't need the plate. It's not containing anything, it's just keeping things clean. It's not like soup that if you have like a flat thing, it all pours everywhere, and you need the bowl. You don't need it. So that's one of the leniencies he uses for a person that's stuck in a situation like that the host or the parents are not keeping Tevilat Kelim, they should be able to use it. Again, don't draw any halachot from this. I'm just borrowing the concept. You should ask a question from your local Orthodox Mora Hora'ah. But nevertheless, that's pretty much what we're saying over. We say, well, do you need the Kli anymore? No, because I'm done. This is Shiarei Mincha. I did my Kmitza. I'm done with my Korban Mincha. So if you don't need it, Midoraita, it does not need to be one. It doesn't need to be in the Kli together, so it's not one. Midoraita, this is not considered one. So hence, if I touch one end, the other end should not become Tameh. And that's what Rabbi Akiva says, Hosifu. What they added Midarabanan is that case, Shiarei Mincha. Gishmak. Well, says, yeah, it is very gishmak. But you know what the problem is? That's one of the four things that Rabbi Akiva said. What else did Rabbi Akiva say? Okay, solet, I understand. But how about levona, ketoret, and gechalim? Those things you definitely need. You're going to be burning all of those. without any shirayim. It's part of your avodah. So you're still you're on the hook and you're stuck. That's what the Gemara is going to say. Says the Gemara, Sarich lekli, Rabbi Akiva, this is before we knock it out. Before we knock it out, the Gemara says, well, if you need the kli, sarich lekli, in other words, before you do the kmitza, before you are done with your korban mincha, hakeli metzarefo. The kli puts everything together as like one, kaf achat, everything becomes achat. She'ein sarich lekeli, but afterwards, when you're no longer in need of the kli because you already did your kmitza, and this is now shiarei mincha, en kli metzarefo. The vessel, the kli, is not metzaref, it does not put them together to make them one, and that's on a deoraita biblical level. Atu Rabbanan and Chachamim came along, they gazru, and they made a gezerah, the af al gav, the eino tzarich lekeli, fourth line, that even though that you don't need the kli no longer, kli metzarefo. The kli still is metzaref. You touch one end, the entire thing becomes tameh. That's the addition of the Rabbanan. Now we could breathe, because when our Mishnah says the chomer b'kodesh, it's a biblical concept. When you have kodesh in one kli, you touch one end, the whole thing becomes tameh. That's Rab Chanin said it's deoraita. It is deoraita. Rabbi Akiva says it's with the Rabbanan in Mishnah. Yeah, that's talking about the case that you're done with the kli because you did your kmitza. That's the addition with the Rabbanan. Because with deoraita, you no longer need the kli. That's so far the answer. Says the Gemara, wait a second. That doesn't work. Tenach solet. That only works for she'arei mincha, because now you're done with the mincha, with korban mincha, and all you have is she'arei mincha. You may as well just pour them out of the kli. You don't need the kli anymore. But for the other three things that Rabbi Akiva mentions, you don't have that. Ketoret ulevona ma'ika lememar. By ketoret and levona, you can't say that because they're all going to be burnt and you need them. It's not that they're shiarei mincha, they're extras. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avuham. Rav Nachman says in the name of Rabba bar Avuham, kegon shetzvaran al gabe kartabla. If we talk about the case that we're changing the answer, and says the Gemara, Rav Nachman says that we're talking about the case that you put them on kartavla. Kartavla is like a flat board. It's not a kli that has toch. It's not a kli that has a bet kibul. It's just literally a flat piece of a vessel, and you place them on top of that. Now, a kli that doesn't have toch, midoraita, the Gemara is suggesting, is not me'ached the content. When do we say the oraita, biblically speaking, that if I touch one piece, the whole thing is considered one? That's only when it's a kli. It's a kli with bet kibul. We know midoraita in the laws of Tumah v'Tahara also, for something to become considered one, for something to become considered mekabel tumah, rather, you have to have a toch. You have to have it has to be a kli. Certainly for being metzaref, even when you talk about halachot of challah, right, there is a concept of siruf sal, that if you have different pieces of dough, that each one of them is less than the amount of chiyuv challah. But if you put all of them in a tzal, you put all these pieces of dough or bread inside a basket, then the basket, the sal, is siruf sal, it makes them one. And now you could do hafrashat challah from that, right? So that's only when you have a toch. Now, we're borrowing concepts just to make it more understandable. I'm not saying that this is applicable fully. There are different details and nuances of halakha, but nevertheless, says Rab Nachman, the concept deoraita, that when you touch one thing, the whole thing is considered one. Kaf achat is like a kaf. Kaf has inside, has a toch, has a bet kibul. When you have a bet kibul, biblically speaking, everything is considered one. When you don't have bet kibul, it's just a flat surface, you place things on top of it. That's not in one kli, it's on top of a vessel. that midoraita would not be considered one, and came along Chachamim and added that as well on a rabbinic level, that if you touch by Kodesh, if the contents on top of this tavla, kartavla, on top of this board, the contents are Kodesh, touch one of them, the whole thing becomes Tameh. But that is midarabanan. It's not midoraita. So that's the final answer. So in other words, you go back to the Mishnah. When our Mishnah says chomer bakodesh mi beteruma, that if you touch one content, one piece of Kodesh inside the Kli, the whole thing becomes Tameh. Is that the Oraita or the Rabbanan? The Oraita. You have a kasha from the Mishnah in Ediyot of Rabbi Akiva that says Kosifu, they added, which is Muchach, it's the Rabbanan. That the Gemara says is talking about what? A flat surface. That's the final answer we're giving for now. Doesn't make a difference. We are falling off of that original answer because it didn't work. Of Solet versus Levona and Ktoret. So the Gemara now is saying something that works before and after. Anytime that you have a Kli that's containing Kodesh, it will become Tameh. If you touch one piece, everything will become Tameh. Well, the Oraita or the Rabban depends. If it has Bet Kibul, if it contains everything inside of it, then it's with the Oraita. If if it's flat, has no Bet Kibul, just different pieces are sitting there, that will be in addition with the Rabbanan. So says the Gemara, Upliga the Rab Chanin ad Rabbi Chia bar Abba. This Rab Chanin that we just mentioned, so remember, Rab Chanin is what? Rab Chanin is what we started today's Gemara with, that says this concept is a biblical concept. That's what Rab Chanin said, right? Kaf achad, this week's parasha. Kaf achad asara zahav melea ketoret, that you make everything that's in the kaf achad. You make all of them one, and that's a biblical concept. That is a machloket with Rabbi Chia bar Abba. What did Rabbi Chia bar Abba say that argues with Rab Chanin? The Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chia bar Abba said in the name of his Rabbi, Rabbi Yochanan, Me'eduto shel Rabbi Akiva nishnit Mishnah zu. This Mishnah that we have over here in Masechet Chagigah, in the beginning of the third parak, is learned and taught only from the Chidush of Rabbi Akiva. You know what the source of the first Mishnah in third parak of Chagigah is? The source of it is from the Edut of Rabbi Akiva in Masechet Eduyot Perek Chet Mishnah Aleph. Perek Gimel Mishnah Aleph of Chagigah is learned from Perek Chet Mishnah Aleph of Eduyot from Rabbi Akiva. Now, well, we discussed already before that the din of Rabbi Akiva is a din the Rabbanan. So if our Mishnah in Chagigah is learned from the Chidush of Rabbi Akiva, that would mean that our Mishnah over here is also a din the Rabbanan. It's not the Oraita. Rab Chanin wanted to say, no, this concept is learned from Kaf Achat Asara Zahav Melea Ketoret. Really, the Oraita. You have Rabbi Akiva? That's a different case. That's the Rabbanan. But Rabbi Chia bar Abba said, no. You know where we see the source of this Mishnah? The source of this Mishnah is that Mishnah by Rabbi Akiva's Edut, which most definitely would make our Mishnah the Rabbanan. So you see, there's a big machloket between Rab Chanin and Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Yes.
What is the motivation? I'm just curious, what is the
well, for the beginners, because there are a lot of things. Beginners there's a lot to begin with. There are a lot of differences when you have Safek the Oraita versus Safek the Rabbanan. If you have a doubt in something that's the Gemara in Chulin, the Vav of Zayin discusses what happens when you have a machloket between Chachamim. Which one do you listen to, right? Now, sometimes you have Rov, sometimes you don't have Rov. And if it's the Rabbanan, right? Halacha k'divrei hamachmir b'doraita, b'drabbanan halacha k'divrei hamekel. It's important to know what is the Oraita, what's not the Oraita, just for ascertaining what the halacha is going to be in any scenario of question. But there are many other layers of difference as well. So it's important for the Gemara to know where this is sourced from. And again, according to Rabbi Chanin, you have a source midoraita for the kli that would make it one. According to Rabbi, it seems like that concept is in its entirety is really the Rabbanan. So says the Gemara. This was one element of our Mishnah. The next one that we're going to discuss, the next one that Mishnah said was Haravi'i b'Kodesh Pasul, that by Kodesh you could have even a Revi'i letum'ah, Mashenken by Teruma. By Teruma, the maximum that you could have is a Shlishi letum'ah. Revi'i doesn't exist. The only thing that has Revi'i is Kodesh and of course Mechatat. But Teruma stops at Shlishi letum'ah. So says the Gemara, Tanya, we learned in a Braita, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Minayin Revi'i b'Kodesh shu pasul. How do we know that Revi'i b'Kodesh is pasul? And we all remember already that pasul means what? Becomes tameh, but it does not transmit tum'ah to another piece. That means it's maximum tum'ah. It doesn't have chamishi afterwards. Whereas if Kodesh would become shelishi, we would call that what? Not pasul, but tameh. Tameh means is tameh in such a way that you touch another piece of Kodesh with it, that also will become tameh. So shlishi for Kodesh is tameh, a revi'i for Kodesh is pasul. That's just terminologies and technicalities of language that we use for it. Nothing more than that necessarily. But how do we know that Kodesh could become revi'i? Essentially, that's what we're asking. Says the Gemara, Vedinhu, it's a kal vachomer. You could logically learn this from a kal vachomer. Uma mechusar kipurim shemutar bitruma pasul b'kodesh sherishi shepasul bitruma eno din she'aseh revi'i lakodesh. So let me explain a little bit of a background to this. When you have a person that becomes tameh, and he's mechusar kapara, that means he's counted the days that he has to count. He has gone through all the processes of tahara, and now is the last day that he has to count in his days of tum'ah. And in the afternoon, he went to mikveh. He came home. The sun is down, right? It's nightfall. What is his status now? Is tahor. What we call him what? What's his terminology? Mechusar Kippurim. What's Mechusar Kippurim? That means he has gone to mikveh. He has waited for Ta'arev Shemesh, for a nightfall. This terminology you have to know. It's like ABCs in Tarot, right? He has went to mikveh. He has gone to mikveh. He has waited for his Erev Shemesh, but he's still called, quote unquote, Mechusar Kippurim. He's lacking kapara, which means tomorrow morning he has to bring a korban, and that would be completing his process of tahara. So what is the nafkamina between a Harav Shemesh guy and which is Mechusar Kippurim, and tomorrow morning? Between the nightfall and tomorrow morning when he brings his korban, what is the difference in halacha? You know what it is? He could eat teruma at night already. He goes to mikveh. He comes back home. Beginning of the Masech Brachot, they could eat teruma, but can he eat kodesh? Oh no, he cannot eat kodesh until tomorrow morning after he brings the korban. After he brings the korban. Now the Gemara is going to try to learn a kal vachomer from this for our purpose of whether or not truma should become more than shlishi kodesh, becoming revi'i. That we're going to use as a platform for a kal vachomer for the din of our Mishnah, which Bezrat Hashem we're going to be discussing in the days to come.
Rabbi, what's miskara? Miskara? Miskara?